Uh, this class is on square foot gardening. So if you signed up for something else, you're on the wrong Zoom call. So we'll get this thing started. Um, if I can make my buttons work, it'll work great. Uh, Square foot gardening is defined as anything that you can do in a square foot as far as planting vegetables, flowers, etc. And what we're going to talk about today is finding your spot. That means what area of your homestead are you going to garden in? How much sun does it get? How much shade does it get? What's the soil like? If you're here in Georgia, it's you've got a lot of clay, but you can also garden very well in clay soil too if you mix the right amendments with it. We're going to talk about that later on. Space planning, some basics of spacing your vegetables out in the garden and how you can do that. And if some of you like squash, you've got a great and easy job. You're only going to have to plant one plant in 4 square feet. So we're going to make it easy for you. What to plant in your garden plot or your container, what and when to plant it. The University of Georgia has a site that you can go to get that information, and I will share that with you later on. I know some of you did not attend UGA. I didn't either, but those keys do exist on your keyboard, so keep that in mind. Also, we're going to talk about either buying seeds or buying plants. What is it most economical for you to do? And I'll tell you already, it's probably buying plants. Transplanting, watering, controlling the weeds, pest, and disease summary, and then we'll do questions all through the presentation. So if you have a question, please type it out and we'll try to get you an answer. Square foot gardening was created by Mel Bartholomew. And Mel Bartholomew, a square foot garden takes 1/5 of the space and work of a conventional single row garden to produce the same harvest and is easy to maintain so the garden stays neat, weedless, and uncluttered all season. Mel passed away several years ago, but when he started this, he was watching gardeners garden and going, look at all this wasted space between the rows. What's up with that? He was an engineer by trade, a civil engineer. And believe it or not, he was born up in New York, and he attended a little school here in Atlanta called Georgia Tech. Graduated with a degree in civil engineering, went back to New York, and not a lot of engineering jobs at that time. And so he decided to go into the Army, where he was a civil engineer. He was an officer who served these 3 or 4 years, came out, and then started a civil engineering company up in New York, retired at the ripe old age of 54, and was looking for things to get involved with. And one was, I think I'll just start a garden. And so he got involved with a community garden where people were planting in rows, like you and I grew up with. And he says, this is so inefficient. There's got to be a better way to do this. And voila, he came up with square foot gardening. It took him several years to come up with this, as far as putting the plants in the right spot, the number of seeds to plant, the number of plants to plant, the best fertilizers to use, and the best soil combination to use. And that's all here. He has written 2 books. His children and his sister have written a 3rd book, which is an update. If you want to buy the book, I would recommend that you go to your local library and check it out. It's called Square Foot Gardening by Mel Bartholomew, MELBARTHOLOMEW. And again, it's called Square Foot Gardening. If you decide that's something you like to buy and utilize, then obviously go ahead and do that. It's a little story about him and what's going on there. Excuse me. The first book for square foot gardening was published in 1981. So if you're going to be looking at that, that's going to be the first book that you're going to find. Why practice square foot gardening? You're going to get a higher yield. You're going to have flexible space that you can work with. Your conservation of the soil, and it's going to be very easy to maintain. Mail found that he could save 40% of the cost of a regular garden, 20% of the space he's going to use to grow the same amount of food, use 10% of the water, use 5% of the seeds, and 2% of the work. The perfect size for a bed that he came up with was a 4 foot by 4 foot wide bed. Now that's providing that you can walk around your bed. If you happen to have an area that's up close to a fence or a house, so maybe that bed only needs to be what you can reach to pull the weed from the furthest distance closest to the fence. So in that case, your bed might be only 2 feet, 2.5 feet at the most, depends on how long your arms are. But by doing all this, you're going to stay out of the beds. So you aren't going to be compacting the soil by not walking in the beds. You're going to get more harvest from less land because you're going to be planting those seeds and plants in a more compact, refined area. And so when you do that, that's going to require less watering. Plants still need to be watered, but it's going to require less because you're not using the square footage you would normally use in a 30 by 50 foot garden. It's also going to take less materials and less compost for you to use. And at the very simple end, crop rotation is going to be a lot easier on you when you get ready to do that. You need to find your spot to garden with. Again, if you have nothing but shade in your garden, you're going to have a very difficult time because things that need a lot of sun, like tomatoes, peppers, things of that nature, need about at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight a day. And if you don't have that, you're going to have a difficult time. Doesn't mean you can't garden, you can, but I'm going to give you some alternative vegetables you use in that place a little later on. You're going to get higher yield out of your plots because you're going to be, again, planting seeds closer together. You're going to have reduced clutter in your beds to work with. You're going to have a diversity of plant choices also to put in your beds, whether it's flowers or whether it's vegetables, whatever you're going to use there. And if you're going to take that one step further and do that in containers, maybe you don't have, maybe you live in an apartment or a condominium and you have very limited space on a balcony or somewhere like that, and you're limited in size, containers may be your best option there. It's going to give you some flexibility. The pots are going to be mobile. You can move them around if you're home during the day, and maybe you can move them more into the sunshine and keep moving them around. A lot easier to maintain, obviously. And you works well for both flowers and vegetables without any problems.
Okay, we got a question here.
Okay.
So is the square foot gardening the same concept as like raised bed or like a raised planter container?
The answer is raised beds work best with square foot gardening because you want to mark off squares in your beds by either using rope, string. I use nylon string in mine that is colored only because I can't see very well and the string is easy for me to watch. And it does better in a bed that has sides on it, whether it's block, rock, boards. I happen to like 2 by 12 boards, 2 inches wide by 12 inches tall. My beds are usually no longer than 10 feet long. I have 2 at the house that are 12 feet long, but no wider than 4 feet. If you do something wider than 4 feet, you're going to be walking in it. And I don't want to ever walk in my beds because it's going to compact the soil.
Okay,
Answer
thank
your
you.
question?
Yeah.
Okay. So getting started, you need the right soil to work in. And if you're working in a spot that has never been used as a garden before, especially if you're here in Georgia, you're going to have a lot of red clay to work with. So you're going to have to amend that soil. Through UGA and DeKalb County, we can get all the free compost we want. There's a big compost pile that's outside of the office where Yanni works for DeKalb County. And you also need a soil test performed. And excuse me, you used to be able to do that through the department through DeKalb County. And right now, Yanni and all of the reps are working out of their homes. So I don't know if that 404-298-4080 number is to the office. And normally they would get your information and send that kit out to you. I'll let Yanni answer to what the current procedure is.
So the phone number is still workable, but we prefer you contact us by our emails. In DeKalb County, we have 3 ag agents. And also, if you want to do a soil test in your review email, I will give you a link and you can order the soil test kit directly from our soil lab.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Perfect soil volume. Area of one garden block that is 4 feet by 4 feet, which is 16 square feet. 4 times 4 is 16. If your bed is 6 inches deep, you're going to need 8 cubic feet of material to go into that bed. If you're starting from the ground, if you want to leave the grass in the bottom, you can do that. I personally like to take newspaper about 8 pages thick or cardboard and lay that on the top of the grass before I put any soil down. I don't use any Roundup or anything of that nature. The soil itself will deaden the grass over a period of time. You don't have to worry about that. The newspaper and the cardboard will attract the worms into that area. So you want those in your bed. So it shows you if your bed is 6 inches deep, you're going to need 8 cubic feet of material. If it's 9 inches, it's going to be 12 cubic feet. And if it's 12 inches, you're going to need 16 cubic feet. When you're mixing up a perfect potting soil, this is called Mel's Mix. You'll see this on the internet. You'll see it on, if you're on Facebook, there is a Facebook page where people are talking about square foot gardening. And this is his mix that he came up with that works well. It's a third, a third, and a third, which is a bale of peat moss is 6 cubic feet. He's just telling you that. A large bag, of course, vermiculite. You can buy all of this at any of the big box stores, Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace Hardware, all sell this stuff. So it's nothing here you can't get. 2 pails of wood ashes or charcoal. That's something you really don't need, but if you're going to do charcoal in there, the charcoal helps hold the moisture in the soil in big chunks and big lumps. Once that gets wet, it holds a lot of moisture in. 10 pails, which is 2.5 gallon size of compost. Again, this would be any kind of compost, whether you're composting at home or whether you're buying compost off of somebody off of Buford Highway if you live here in Atlanta, or you're getting it through a local resource. 1 coffee can full of lime is 4 cups. So if you don't have a coffee can, use 4 cups, measuring cup, and that's good. 1 pound coffee can full of organic fertilizer. And again, all your big box stores sell organic fertilizer. So just look on the bag, says organic, read and see if it's specifically for vegetables or if it's for succulents or if it's for shrubs. Make sure you're buying the right fertilizers when you're doing that kind of thing, okay? Getting started, once you do your soil sample test and the soil sample comes back, it normally takes 7 to 10 business days. And after you send the sample off, they're going to send you a written report to your email address and it only comes to you, and it's going to tell you what your soil pH is. And if you need to raise your soil pH from a 4 to a 5, you're going to need 3 teaspoons of lime for a square foot. So we're talking about square foot gardening. If you have a bed that's 4 by 4, that's 16. 3 times 16 is the amount of lime that you're going to be putting into that bed. It's not a lot. It's not a half a bag. It's not a cup. So you have to be very careful with this when you're adjusting your beds. If you look down where it says from a 5 to a 4, you need 1 teaspoon of aluminum sulfate. That's something you normally can buy at the big box store. I checked yesterday at my local Home Depot in Tilly Mill. They didn't have any. They said it was too early. I know you can buy it online through Amazon, which I bought it before on. So if you need that type of material, check with your local Ace Hardware big box store first. If they don't have it there, buy the very smallest amount that you can buy. It's not going to take a lot for you to adjust your pH level in your soil.
Tilky, we got one question about the soil. So
Okay.
the question is, what is your opinion of tilling up the native soil and like adding compost versus the layer of newspaper to separate the native soil from the potting soil we mentioned before? Do you have a preferred way to do it? Or
I prefer just to put the newspapers down on the grass or on the ground, bare ground, whatever you have there. If you want to dig up underneath that with a pickaxe or a mattock to loosen that soil up underneath, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, that's just going to allow for more drainage underneath that, but a lot of people can't or are not strong enough to do that. Some are. If you're strong enough to do it, you want to, absolutely, I would dig it up. But if you're not, like my mother would buy a bag of soil, put it in the trunk of her car and bring it home and literally take it, open up the bag in the trunk of the car and take it out a coffee can at a time to take to her flower bed. So some people, again, have the strength to do that. Some people don't. If you don't, just put the newspaper or the cardboard down. And if you can dig it up, yes, go ahead and dig it up by all means. Can't hurt.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Son, how much sun does your garden get? You need to know when you get ready to garden how much sun that area is going to get. So I would go outside with some string or water hose and lay it out. And if you're going to do a 4-foot wide bed and 8 feet long or 10 feet long or whatever, how long it is, do your water hose out there. And then if you are a person that's lucky enough to be retired now, like I am, you can go out and check that different times of the day and see where the sun is on that bed. Because partial sun is going to be 4 to 6 hours a day. Anything over 6 hours is what you're looking for, if at all possible. I'm going to give you some alternatives for partial sun 4 to 6 hours. It's not going to be all the vegetables you're going to do at 6, but you're still going to be able to eat. Drainage, be aware of poor drainage. If you've got water puddling in an area that you want to grow in, and that water is going to stay there for several hours after the rain is over, you have some very hard packed soil. But if that's the only place to put your bed, I would dig a trench through there about 4 to 6 inches wide and about 4 to 5 inches deep, just one trench through the bed, and then do your soil on top of that, your newspapers, whatever you're going to use, or dig it up to give the water a chance to flow under and through your bed and get out of there. So it's not going to stay in your bed and cause you a lot of additional problems there. You want to build your soil up. You want to dig that drainage ditch, and you want to make sure that when it does rain really hard, or you've got the water hose on or the sprinkler system on, that water is going to get out of there. You don't want a lot of excess water keeping that around, because that's going to cause you additional problems in the end. If you notice the upper left-hand corner, this is a bed that's built off the ground. And if you're a little older or you have back problems and you just don't like to stoop over or bend over, a raised bed works well. And if you see there, it's laid out in 12, that's 12 inches, believe it or not. It's just the angle of the camera that taken the picture that caused it to look a little bigger than it actually is. But each space is 12 inches wide. In the very far back of that bed, there are 2 poles attached that go all the way down to the ground, go up about 5 feet tall, that's got netting stretched across it. And there happens to be, if you look in the bed, there's 3 tomato plants planted in that bed. And the trellis is for the tomatoes to climb up. Now you have to be judicious in tying your tomatoes up to that. It's not going to do it on its own. I primarily weave my plants in and out of that. And you can also take old nylon hose, stockings that women wear, pantyhose, if you will, or if you don't wear them anymore, buy a pair for 99 cents. I just bought some the other day to tie my tomatoes up with this year because they all rotted. I've used them about 4 or 5 years, and I cut them in 1-inch little strips. And the reason I like to use pantyhose is because they stretch. If you tie it up with a string, the string is not going to bend or stretch, and it's going to cause injury to your tomato plant, pepper plant, or whatever you're trying to put up. Pantyhose will stretch out a little bit, but still keep the plant where it needs to be. Look over on the top right-hand side, you will see that there are beds lined out there. That's a 4 by 4 foot bed. There is 1 pepper plant planted in each spot. And that's going to work. If you come down to the bottom left-hand side of the page, that bed is 4 feet by 4 feet. And you know that because you're looking at the way the plants are planted in each of the boxes. And so that works out pretty well for you. A lot of carrots are planted in there, as well as radishes. If you look to the far right, this bed is built. It has the grid system in it, and the grid system is actually the water system. He has a water system set up to this, so it'll come on automatically and water the beds for him. A bed of this design, you cannot completely get into to harvest or to pull weeds. And if you look up, if you count across from the left going to your right, 4 spaces, and go up 4 spaces. Now come down 1, so that's 3 spaces. You cannot do anything with that. It's too far for you to reach to pull weeds out of there or to plant anything in that box. If you go over to the next bed next to it, you can't do anything in that one either up there. So that design doesn't work too well for that kind of bed. That bed needs to be separated. The bottom right-hand side needs to be separated from the other bed or extended to the other side up at the top of it. Think about planting vertically when you're planting your garden. This particular bed has 4 tomato plants in it. And again, they're being trellised up. If you're going to do a tomato plant, this again, bed is off of the ground for ease. I would suggest that you do a determinate tomato. A determinate tomato is a tomato that's going to grow to about probably 4 feet tall. That's it. And it's going to produce tomatoes for about a 2 to 3 week period, and then it's going to die. And you can pull it out and plant something else. If you put an indeterminate tomato in that same spot, that plant from where you see at the bottom of the soil up in the air is going to grow anywhere from 11 to 15 feet tall. And if you don't have a pogo stick or not that tall or can't jump that tall, you will never reach the tomatoes that it's going to grow to. You also have to have it trellised for it to grow and do what it's supposed to. So you're going to need to think about that. So again, I would do determinate tomatoes in any square foot gardening or any process where you're going to use a raised bed. Space planning for containers. Again, this works in containers. If you look to the container on the right-hand side, you've got onion sets over there. That pot is 24 inches across. If you do, when we talk about inches in diameter, we're talking about if you took a tape measure across the top of that pot from one side to the other, that would be 24 inches. And so in a pot that size, they're normally going to be, if it's 24 inches across, it's usually that deep, but not in all cases. A lot of times you'll find a shallow pot, but it needs to be at least 24 inches for this one. In this particular pot, you can grow 50 carrots in there, 50 carrot seeds, or 50 radishes, or 50 onions. Don't combine them. Put one thing in a pot. If you like radishes, put all radishes in one pot. If you like onions, put all onions in one pot. And the reason you want to do that is they all have different water needs. They all have different fertilizer needs. So they need to be able to flourish in their own right. 25 bush beans or beets. You put 25 bush beans in there, you are stretching that pot all over the place. Beets, no problem. 18 chard or celery plants. Celery in there likes to spread out. That celery will be a big bush if you put 18 celery plants in there. And it's going to take a long time to grow in our environment. Celery doesn't do well here in Georgia. Chard will. 15 strawberry plants. Strawberries do extremely well here. 15 strawberry plants would work well there. 5 cabbage. When we're talking about cabbage, excuse me, we're talking about a Napa cabbage or something of that nature. We're not talking about a, 8 or 9 pound Georgia cabbage. A lot of difference there. 3 okra plants, bell peppers, or cucumber plants. If you're going to do a cucumber plant in there, you might want to consider doing a bush cucumber plant rather than a trellis, unless you have something for that trellis and for those cucumbers to grow on. If you're limited in space, don't get a trellising cucumber, get a bush cucumber. 1 to 3 tomatoes, depending on size. I'm telling you, I would only put 1 tomato in that pot. I find that through past experience, that tomatoes like to be in there by themselves, 1 plant. When you plant it, I take all of the leaves off of the plant with the exception of the top 4. All the rest of that plant goes into the bottom of that pot straight down, because every bit of that plant that's underground is going to create roots. And the roots is what makes that plant, that tomato plant, grow strong. And if you do that with all of your tomato plants, I plant tomato plants with post hoe diggers. True story. I pull off everything but the top 4 leaves. I dig a hole, put some fertilizer in the very bottom of it. I like to use personally Milorganite. I don't own the company, don't own any stock in the company. I'd put probably 3 tablespoons of Milorganite in the bottom of the hole. Put my tomato plant roots down in the bottom of the hole. Fill it about 1/4 of the way full with soil. I water it in to make sure that there's no air bubbles around the root system. I will put usually another tablespoon of Milorganite around that. Fill it 3/4 of the way full with more soils, put more water in the hole. And then I fill it the rest of the way up with soil and create a saucer effect around my plant so that whenever I water, the water doesn't run off. It collects next to the root system and it goes right down the plant and waters it very well.
Okay, we got a question here.
Go ahead.
So I download a file called vegetables that grow well together. Do you recommend always have separate container for individual vegetables?
Yes, I would do individual containers. When you're talking about pots, yes, I would do individual pots. Again, I would put radishes in one if you're doing radishes. I would not mix radishes and onions and celery and put all of that into one pot. Again, each one of those vegetables requires a different amount of moisture, a different amount of fertilizer, and in some cases, a different amount of sun. Radishes can be grown in partial shade, where tomatoes won't make it too well. Tomatoes require hot sunshine to produce well, where your radishes and your lettuce would grow in some partial shade. So yes, I would separate them, do one vegetable in each pot.
Okay, thank you.
All right. When you're getting ready to plant, ask yourself, what does my family eat on a weekly basis? And that's what I would try to grow. This past year, in 2020, there were over 3 million brand new gardeners that has never stuck their finger in soil before, that bought seeds and said, I'm going to grow something, because they were scared to death that they were going to run out of food that they could buy at the grocery store. And in some cases, people were right. The same problem is going to exist this year. You have a lot of people buying seeds instead of, if they have a 4x4 plot, to give you an idea, they might buy 3 or 4 or 5 different packages of tomato plants. Well, in some cases, there's anywhere from 30 to 50 seeds in one packet of tomatoes. So if they only need 2 seeds out of that whole pack, the rest of the pack goes to waste, unless they have friends that they offer it to, or some way to dispose of those seeds that's going to help somebody else out. So you had a lot of people buying seeds and not using all of them, which was causing a shortage in the market. I've already bought a lot of seeds. I'm also chairman of my local community garden, and we have about 20 charity beds that we raise food in. Last year, we donated a little over 1,900 pounds of food, and we buy all of our seeds. And we have to try to figure out what we're going to grow in these beds as different food products finish up. And it was very difficult to find seeds last year for us, with all of the different resources that we have. You're probably going to end up doing the same thing, but you need to know what your family eats. So buy seeds of the product and produce that your family likes to eat. And find a neighbor or someone that's also going to garden and say, hey, I bought the Cherokee purple tomatoes. What did you buy? And I'll swap some seeds with you. And find some other families that you can swap some seeds with, so that you're not going out spending a fortune on seeds that you won't use. Also, how much time and attention do you have to spare? If you've got young children, you may not have a lot of time to spare with doing a garden. But then again, that's a great place to get your kids involved, is in gardening. Once they get out there and they can get dirty and they see that you're enjoying it and what you're doing, that's a big difference. If you have children that's, I'll say 7 years of age and older, there's also a book called Square Foot Gardening with Kids. It's written on their level. It's written on about a 3rd grade level that they can read. It shows them a lot about gardening and how the sun affects plants, how to build your soil, all the different things that you could do with that, and what's going to be easy for you to grow when you're growing vegetables. what plants will thrive in your current lighting conditions. I've already told you, you need at least 6 hours of sun to grow a tomato, at least. You can grow them with less, but they're not going to do well. How much sun and shade does your garden spot get? What types of plants will thrive in your soil type that you have? That's the reason we want you to get a soil test in the beginning, so that you're just not out there throwing lime and fertilizer and everything else in a garden spot and you have no idea what your soil is already. But once you get that soil results back in 7 to 10 business days, it's going to tell you what you have in your soil. And if you can't read the report, that's not a problem. They will give you phone numbers on there that you can call to talk to someone that can answer that question for you. If we happen to be back in the office as volunteers, and Master Gardener will be happy to go over that with you or any of the agents that are there. So you need to know the type of soil you have. You need to know the pH of your soil so that we can give you the right information to adjust all the things that could be wrong with your soil, or it could be good, could be ready for you to plant in. Next thing, you got to determine if you're going to plant from seeds or if you are going to. I would not start a tomato plant in my garden with a seed. From the time you plant the seed till the time you see a little something poke out of the ground, depending on the soil temperature, it's going to be 7 to 8 weeks. So if you're doing tomatoes, bell peppers, squash, cucumbers, I personally buy those plants. I grow a lot of the seeds, but for my own garden, I go buy them. It's just the instant gratification of putting it in the soil and knowing that in 60 or 70 days after you plant a tomato plant, you're going to be eating a tomato. For a cucumber, usually 50 to 60 days, you're going to be eating a cucumber off of that. Peppers takes longer. It's usually 90 to 110 days for a pepper. Peppers, the hotter it gets, the better the peppers like it, whether it's a bell pepper or a jalapeno pepper or ghost pepper. Peppers just like hot weather. Tomatoes, once the temperature gets about 84 to 87 degrees, they stop blossoming. No blossoms, no tomatoes. So you need to shade those with some shade cloth or do something to get your umbrella out and put it around it in the afternoon or something of that nature, okay? When you're starting from seeds and you're getting ready to repot, I have in my house here is where I'm doing this from. I have a growing section in my house that my wife graciously lets me do. And I have 3 racks of 72 each of, I have one of cilantro, one of basil, and one of sage that I will take over to the greenhouse once they come up and get going and donate those to the greenhouse. And we will end up selling those at the end of April, early part of May. And when we go to repot those, we pot those up. It's best to use at least a 4-inch pot. And that way you're not going to repot again and again and again. Do it one time and have it over with. And after you're repotting into a 3 or 4-inch pot, the next time you take that out of the pot, it's going to go into the ground. That's the way the least amount of time you're going to handle that plant, the better off you're going to be. Some seeds require soaking overnight. If it's a hard seed like an okra seed, I will soak okra overnight. Anything that's large in a seed, peas, beans, corn, okra, any of that, I will soak overnight. I will put it in tepid water. Tepid means not the cold water out of your faucet. It means that water needs to warm up a little bit. It needs to be ready to roll. So you need to do something with that. Some seeds require soaking. So you need to check the package. but all of your hard ones you need to do. Keep your soil moist. Don't allow it to dry out once you plant it. 70 to 75 degrees is the ideal temperature if you're planting seeds. When plants are sturdy enough, you need to plant in the cool of the evening or on a cloudy day. That way you're not going to blister them to death in a hot sun. When to plant, starting seeds from the seeds. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage takes 5 to 6 weeks from the time you plant the seed till the time it's ready to set out in your garden. Eggplant and peppers, 8 to 9 weeks. Tomatoes, 6 to 7. Lettuce, cucumber, squash, 3 to 4 weeks. Salvia, snapdragons, psyllium, all flowers, 7 to 8 weeks. Geraniums, 10 to 12 weeks. Impatiens, 6 to 7 weeks. Marigolds, 5 to 6. So you can see, I just gave you a range of plants and how long it's going to take to get that done. It takes a while. When you're getting ready to take these plants outdoors, you want to harden off the transplants for 8 to 10 days. What we mean by that is, once you pot that plant up into the 4-inch pot, or it's ready, it's grown to the height that you want to take to your garden, you need to set that plant outside. Don't set it in the hot sun. Set it in the shade somewhere. Move it out into the sun for a couple of hours. Move it back into the shade and let it sit there for about 8 to 10 days. Let it acclimate to the night temperatures and to the day temperatures, and just let it get used to its environment. And then you can plant it. Keep plants out of the direct sunlight. If you've got a lot of root-bound plants, slice the roots in the bottom of the plant before you transplant it. Spread that root ball out. I like to use fish emulsion. You can buy this at any big box store. Walmart sells it, anywhere. And you can mix this up. It depends on one you get. The one I buy, I mix a cup to a gallon of water and it lasts forever. So it doesn't take a lot. That's just something I use. It's works well for me. How to transplant: poke a hole in the planting medium that you want to use, sticking your finger in the soil. If you're doing 4 plants, it depends on what it is. I'm going to show you here in a minute. Stick your finger, you don't need anything. You can use a pencil if you don't want to get your finger dirty there. If you got a manicure, put on a rubber glove, do that. I get my hands dirty, so it doesn't bother me. You want to plant into the hole, fill the hole halfway full of soil. Add water to fill the space. You want to settle the roots and eliminate the air pockets. Again, fill the hole with soil and creating a saucer around the plant. And that allows the water to soak in and not run off when you're using that to plant in. Protect your plant transplants, especially when you're watering early and you're planting early. This is a cut-off milk jug. You can do a water jug too. Doesn't make any difference. Make sure you take the top off of it, the blue top, unscrew that off of it. You want it to get air in there. You don't want it to hold heat during the day. Set that down into the soil around the plant, push some dirt up around it so first wind comes along, doesn't blow it off. Or you can take through the top and stick a stick down through the top. Be careful. Don't hit the plant you just planted. And that'll keep it from blowing around also and keep it in place, so that you can do that. So you can have something there to work with that'll keep you doing your thing. What to plant in full sun? Again, we're looking at 6 hours of sun a day. Alpine strawberries, arugula, Asian greens, beets, blackberries, blueberries, bok choy, carrots, chard, Chinese cabbage, chives, cilantro, currants, gooseberries, kale, lemon balm, lettuce, mesclun greens, melons, mushrooms, mustard, oregano, peas, radishes, scallions, spinach, and tomatoes. All of those plants require at least 6 hours of sun a day. If you try to grow it in less, you're going to have issues. Part shade, onions, parsley, peas, radishes. If you look over on the right-hand side, that is a urn that you plant strawberries in. We planted onions in it. It works. Onions, parsley, peas, radishes, spinach, winter squash, beets, carrots, cauliflower, cucumbers, lettuce, Swiss chard only require 4 to 6 hours of sunlight a day. If you are a garden member with Dunwoody Community Garden and Orchard, I can tell you your garden gets at least minimum 10 hours a day of sun. Some beds get 12, but you're going to get a minimum of 10. It's just the luck of the draw and how our garden is laid out, how many hours of sun we get over there. Here's a planting guide for you. Where it says arugula 16, that means you're going to plant 16 seeds of arugula in that 1 square foot. The best thing to do to that square is to cut it in half, north to south, and then cut it in half again, east to west. And then in each one of those blocks, you plant 4 seeds in each one of those little boxes. And the 4 times 4 is 16. So you have all of your arugula planted. Brussels sprouts, that means you put 1 plant in that 1 square foot box. Cucumbers, you put 1 cucumber in that 1 box. Head lettuce, you put 4 plants, whether you set out transplants or whether you plant the seeds. Peas, 8 seeds. Basil, 2 plants you can put in that box. Cabbage, only 1. Dill, 9 plants. Kale, 2. Peppers, 1. You can see in a 4 by 4 foot square box, I'm sure there's a lot of vegetables on here you don't buy, you don't eat, you don't like. But find something that you do, and instead of putting 8 peas in, put 16 in. Put 24 in. Whatever it is that your family eats. But in a 4 by 4 foot box that you see here, excuse me, if it's not up against your house, it's away from a fence, you can pull weeds, you can plant in every box that you have here and never once walk in that bed again because of the dimensions of the box. Yes, I recommend putting the grids in. It's very important for you to do that. That keeps you on track of how you need to plant your seeds. It's a visual guide for you, and it works out really well. If you like zucchini squash and you say, Tilke, that's all I'm going to plant in my bed, and you've got a 4 by 4 foot bed, 1 plant is all you're going to plant. That's going to fill up a 4 by 4 foot box, 1 plant. So think about that. If you love squash, but you like a lot of other things too, I would go to Publix, Lidl, or Kroger's, wherever you shop, and buy my squash or my zucchini and plant something else in that 4 foot square area. But 1 plant. I would not put any watermelons in here. I wouldn't put any muskmelons, cantaloupes, anything that's long and vining, because it's going to take up your whole bed. Save that for somewhere else.
Okay, we got one question.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. So turnips like purple top, full sun or partial sun? Turnip.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
So the question is, turnips, TURNIPS, like
Yes.
purple top,
Yes.
full sun or partial sun?
That would be partial. They can go to 4 to 6 hours of sun.
Okay.
Okay.
And the next question is, what vegetable grow particularly well in our climate? So like, or like what vegetable should we avoid? Like you mentioned celery.
I find celery doesn't do well here. Also, I haven't seen anyone yet. We have 96 garden beds in our community garden. I've seen one person grow Brussels sprouts a little. Brussels sprouts don't do well here. Broccoli does extremely well here. Cauliflower does extremely well here. Tomatoes do great. All kinds of peppers do great. Squash does great. Zucchini does great, and all of that. Eggplant does extremely well here. Okra does extremely well here. We've had great success with all of that. Primarily, it's the people that have tried to grow Brussels sprouts, celery, that haven't had a lot of success with it.
Okay, so the next question is, can you talk about crop rotation?
Crop rotation?
Yeah.
I will in a second here.
Okay.
All right. Selecting the right containers. Again, on the left-hand side, you're looking at a 4-inch pot. All of those things you can put in a 4-inch pot. Now, when you look at carrots, all carrots, there's some that are 8 and 10 inches long. So think of the size of the carrot that you're planting first into a 4-inch pot. It may take an 8-inch pot. It depends on the variety of the carrot that you're planting. So look at the length that you're going to plant there. If you're getting into corn, there's some corn that has root systems 5 and 6 feet long. But if you look at the pot sizes, that on an average is a good size pot for you to be able to use to plant your garden there. Planting containers. You need to support vining vegetables. These are peas. We took three small bamboo sticks, stuck them in the ground, wrapped some jute twine around it for the peas to climb up. I find that jute works better than wire. I just like to use that a lot better. Your fruit quality is a lot better. You're going to get a lot less disease if you've got stuff staked in your garden. Vegetables come and go really quickly. Again, it's easiest to grow that in one container. In other words, put only lettuce in one container. I would put radishes in another. And that way, when you take this out, this lettuce out, you're ready to put something else in there that's going to grow. Growing fruits, make sure you've got drainage holes. Consider the weight of the container and the soil and the tree, especially if you're going to try to move that thing inside in the wintertime. The container should be as wide as they are high. If you use a terracotta to plant a tree in, and let's say that terracotta is 24 inches across, which is a small pot, you're going to have a tough time dragging that thing into the house. Terracotta is very, very heavy. Plastic containers will move a lot easier, but you take a chance on busting those out after 4 to 5 years. So be careful of what kind of container you use. Dwarf varieties are best suited for containers with a max height of 10 feet. We're talking about a tree that gets 10 feet tall. Can you manage a tree in your home or apartment, condominium, wherever you live, that's 10 feet tall? When you're buying a dwarf plant, you need to read up on that plant really well and see how tall it gets. It's the last statement. Ideal for year-round indoor citrus is a banana plant. It takes about 18 to 19 months for a banana to produce. Think about that. Also, it drops sap inside your house. I have seen bananas growing where we live. I happen to live in Dunwoody, and I'm out a lot and see a lot of homes, a lot of gardens. And I've seen bananas growing up close to houses that can radiate some heat back to that banana plant. You know, we've had temperatures down to 24 degrees. That will kill anything. And so I haven't been by to see if a friend of mine that's got a banana plant growing to see if he covered it up or not, to see if it's going to, how it's going to, how well it's going to do. But he moves it in and out. And the last time I looked, he had it outside. But you have to really look at the size of the plant you're going to get and see if your house, apartment, or condominium will accommodate it. Pollination is a problem in containers if you're moving them in and outside. Most vegetables and fruits develop from fertilized flowers, except leafy greens and root vegetables. So if you have flowers you're trying to propagate, whether it's tomatoes, whether it's peppers or anything of that nature, they need to be propagated. And so every time you walk by your tomato plant, if you'll shake it a little bit, that'll self-pollinating, that'll help pollinate it. So you need to think about that. Corn is wind pollinated. Don't plant one row of corn. Nothing's going to happen to it. You're going to have a lot of corn stalks that the squirrels will love to hang out in, and no corn, because it's very difficult for corn to pollinate that way. You need at least 4 to 5 rows side by side for corn to pollinate well. Corn in a square foot garden, I would make the whole bed 4 by 4 or 3 by 6, whatever it is, corn. And that way you're going to get enough to ensure pollination. Gardening made easier by standing. These are boxes that we made that are standing up, makes it easier for you to garden. These beds are 3.5 feet wide. They do have marine plywood on the very bottom of the bed. And we have a 1/2-inch hole every 12 inches in the bottom of the bed for drainage. When you drill that hole for water, for drainage, when I start putting soil in, I'll put a coffee filter over the hole and put a little soil over it first to keep the coffee filter in place, and then put the rest of the soil in. That way it's not just washing out of a hole in the bottom of your bed. So it works pretty good. Or if you've got a lot of money, you can take screen from like a screen door, buy it large enough to fit the whole bottom of the bed. That works great too. Watering correctly. Sufficient water supply is a basic requirement. Make sure that your hose is going to reach, or you can carry it to wherever you're going to need it, because water is not there, your plants are going to die. You don't want to ever water when the sun is out heavy. You need to water early morning or late afternoon. Don't ever water the leaves of the plant. Water the soil, not the leaves. When you water the leaves, water spots gets on the leaves, and that's like a magnifying glass when the sun comes out. The sun hits the water droplet and literally will burn the leaf of the plant because it's like a magnifier glass. Drip and soaker hoses are great. You only need to turn those on for maybe, I would start out at 5 minutes with a soaker hose. If you've got it on a timer, set it for 5 minutes starting out. And after it's done its thing for 5 minutes, stick your finger down in the soil and see how deep the water is. The max you're gonna need to turn that thing on usually is maybe 10 minutes. 7 to 10 minutes usually is max on a soaker hose in a bed, especially if you have it coming on every day. Again, keep your foliage dry. Use a watering can if you need to, if you can't get a hose out there to it, but don't wet your leaves. 10 Commandments of Square Foot Gardening. Thou shalt not waste space with large rows. Thou shalt not use or dig up your existing soil. Thou shalt not use a hoe, shovel, or a rototiller in your bed. You really don't need it. Once you get that bed established, you can pull any weed out. It doesn't take me 5 minutes to weed 2 beds that are 4 feet by 10 feet. not 5 minutes. If you get out there every day and do that, you'll get ahead of the weeds. And when they come up, pull them out, get rid of them. Don't put them in your compost pile. Don't waste seeds by overplanting. I never, ever plant anything where I hope that I plant 3 seeds and I hope that one comes up and all 3 come up and I have to get rid of 2. Like you'll do with radishes a lot of times and things of that nature where you have to pull them up or cut them off. I plant 1 seed if I'm planting radishes every 3 inches. That's it. I don't ever pull anything up out of a bed that I planted too many of. I don't plant too many in the first place. Okay. Thou shalt not use any fertilizer, insecticides, or pesticides. If you use the Mel's mix, you need to read up on that. You can Google it. It's easy to find. It's a third, a third, and a third, and it'll give you all of the things that you need there to use. It works. I use it. It does extremely well. You won't have to fertilize again if you use it. You won't have to worry about insecticides or pesticides. Thou shalt not plant more than you can use there. Thou shalt not waste water by hosing, sprinkling, or irrigation. Again, water what you need to water. Water the plant. Water the soil. Don't water the leaves. Thou shalt not fail to grow your vine crops on a vertical support. If you're going to grow something, like I said before, like a tomato, a vining, peas, beans, you need to make sure that you have something that they're going to be able to climb up so that they're not spread out all over your bed. Thou shalt not fail to replant each square as it's harvested. As you harvest that bed, you need to have something, excuse me, ready to go back in it. Because that's the key to you keeping something growing in that bed at all times. Any questions?
We have several questions in the chat box. So the first one I think we haven't answered yet is, can you talk about crop rotation a little bit? Is crop rotation necessary for the square food gardening?
It is. I can tell you, I personally don't do a lot of it, only because I don't usually keep the same things in the same spot. So like if I pull all of my radishes up, I've usually got lettuce ready to go in there. And after my lettuce comes out, I've got something else ready to grow in there. So I've usually put, I'll plant one spot sometimes 3 or 4 times during the season. So I'm already rotating my crops as I'm putting things in there. And I try to put something in there that's a companion to what needs to go in there with my other crops that are there. So you can find plenty of companion planting charts. Google them. They will come right up for you. And you can see what you need to plant close to each other. And it works out really well for you.
Okay, so next question is, how about using the Danver, DANVER, half-long carrots?
Danvers, yes, I grow a lot of those. I do those on my, again, my beds are 12 inches tall, and Danvers do very well in the bed. I plant each, if you've ever planted a carrot seed, you know you need a magnifying glass just about. They're very small. I plant 16 carrots in 1 foot. And it depends on how big the carrots are going to get. In a Danvers case, I only plant 12 and not 16 because they're bigger around. And so I do that. I plant a carrot seed about every 3 inches.
Okay. So the next question is, what about 3 sisters? Does this go against square food gardening?
3 sisters, that would be corn, squash, and beans. 3 sisters, if your beds are long enough and wide enough, yes, you could do that. If you've got a bed that's, let's say, 3 feet wide or even 2 feet wide and say, 10 feet long, 15 feet long, you would have to you need something where you can do corn at least 4 rows wide. So your bed needs to be that wide. So I would have a bed would have to be at least 3 to 4 feet wide to do your corn in there. And then once your corn is started and starts coming up, that's when you're planting your beans to trellis up your corn, and your squash spreads out all over the ground, which keeps your weeds down. And that's called the Three Sisters. The American Indians used Three Sisters when Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492 and arrived on this continent. The Indians were already planting the Three Sisters, been around for a long time. And yes, you can do it, but again, make sure you got rows of corn that are at least 4 rows long, 4 rows wide for proper pollination. Go ahead.
Okay, so next question is, what were the measurements for drainage holes?
Didn't hear the question.
Repeat question. What were the measurements for drainage holes? The measurements of drainage
What were the
holes.
measurements for the drainage hose? That would be in the raised beds, that would be anywhere from a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch. I would not go any larger than a 1/2 inch. I put 1/2 inch holes in my beds to be consistent. And over top of that, usually I've got some old screen doors that I had around. And so I put the screen from screen doors in the bottom of mine. I stapled it. I cut a 6-inch disc out and stapled that with about 4 staples over each hole. And that keeps the soil in the bed, but it still allows the water to drain through.
Okay, so the next question is organic seed better?
Is organic what better?
Organic seed.
Or organic seeds better?
Mhm.
You're going to have a difficult time finding organic seeds of any kind that's used in home gardening. To say that they're better, the problem is if I have a bed next to yours, or I'm your next door neighbor 100 yards away, and you've planted corn that's organic seed, and I've planted just regular corn, the wind blowing the pollination from my garden into your garden is going to mess up your GMO, non-GMO type plants. So it's in gardening, it's just not something you're going to see a lot of.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, can you spell the name of the product you were referring to? I guess that's a product you mentioned as the fertilizer.
Fertilizer, I use a liquid fertilizer. I use fish emulsion on just about everything. If I use a hard or granular fertilizer, I'm primarily using Milorganite. Milorganite is it's not organic, but it's something that's been around since the early 30s. It's a processed fertilizer. You can take 1 bag of it and it'll last you all year. And I don't hold it over the season. I'll take it out, whatever's left, and put it in a bucket and just sprinkle it around my yard or around the trees or my flowers and things of that nature. That's Milorganite. Okay. You can find it at any big box store.
Okay, I see somebody already typed that name in the chat box. So the next question is planting very small seeds in raised bed. Do you have a trick for proper spacing?
I do. It's called a yardstick. I have planting sticks that I use. And what it is I have taken a piece of 2x2 that for my 8-foot beds, I take a piece of 2x2 lumber that I bought at Home Depot, and I marked it off every 3 inches. And I put a dot every 3 inches, and then I went back with my drill and drilled like an 1/8 of an inch hole down through there, and I wrote on it 3 inches. So I know that that side of the stick is 3 inches. And I can sit down in a chair and put 1 seed, if I'm doing carrots or whatever it is, into those holes 1 at a time. And if it's my bed's 8 feet long, I can plant a whole row of carrots at one time just by turning my board over after I've made my trench. I water it real good, and then I will cover it with soil, and then I'll water it again, and I put some sticks at each end to know where that bed is, to know where that line of carrots or radishes or whatever it is that I planted. That's what I use. And I also use a ruler or a yardstick a lot of times to make sure that I'm getting my measurements correct. I also have my beds marked off on the ends. I already have them marked off at 3 inches, 6 inches, 9 inches, and 12 inches. So I know if my rows have to be 12 inches apart, I can look. I don't have to measure. I already know where it needs to be to do those kind of rows with.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, do you use growing bags?
I have used growing bags. I didn't last year. Growing bags are good if you don't have any other thing to use. I use a lot of buckets, a lot of 5-gallon buckets. I have a friend of mine that manages, it's called the Veggie Patch, which is up Interstate 85. If you ever buy any produce from Whole Foods or Fresh Market, probably about 80% of their groceries comes from Whole Foods. He raises, and he raises in 5-gallon buckets, whether it's tomatoes, whether it's peppers, whether it's whatever it is. He just uses 5-gallon buckets, uses 0 fertilizer, 0 pesticides. He's certified 100% organic, and he's recertified every 3 months. And he only uses buckets, 5-gallon buckets, and he does use some grow bags. I don't have any that I'm going to use this year, but yes, I have used grow bags, and they work very well.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is how to protect your raised bed when you live around wood?
How do I protect what?
How do you protect your raised bed or like your vegetable garden when you live around wood?
Well, when I'm using wood, all the wood that you can purchase today is none of it has arsenic in it anymore. Hasn't had for the past 12 years.
Well,
So
I think the question I think is asking you about if you have a raised bed or vegetable garden, but you have deers, all this wildlife around. How do you protect your vegetables from like deers? Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I got it. How do I protect my vegetables from, well, number one, if they're in the ground, I have all underneath my beds, I've got a mesh wire that's finer than chicken wire to keep the moles from coming up through the bottom of my beds. Around the top of my beds that I have at home, I have a wire that's probably 24 inches tall that keeps the rabbits out. Squirrels will get into anything that you have. So I try to keep them a feeder full of feed away from my garden so that they don't get into my garden. And so I keep those out that way. I have deer coming through my yard all the time. And matter of fact, I had 8 through here the other morning. And I try to keep things up and working like sticks that point out from my vegetable garden that point out. And so they'll run into those like long fishing poles, things of this nature, cane poles. I put those in when I have things in there that they're going to get into.
Sorry, I mute myself. So the next question is treated lumber okay for raised bed as long as it's new?
Yes, anything that you would buy today at a big box store is not treated with arsenic. It is food safe. It's good for you to plant vegetables in with no issues. Any university you want to, agricultural department university that you want to tap into, whether you went to the University of Georgia or not, we'll have that information on their website for you. But I can tell you it is safe. to use. We have 96 beds in our community garden that have been in for over 10 years with no problems at all. We random test those beds every year by soil test, and we've never had an issue with any of it. Anything that you find is going to tell you that it is safe to use today to grow vegetables in with no issues, no problems at all. I would not use railroad ties under any condition at any time for any of your flowers or any of your vegetable garden, because they have creosote. The creosote is not good for your flowers. It's certainly not good for you. Creosote can kill you. So don't use railroad ties.
Okay. So I think I answered this squash bugs. So do you have any good organic methods to control the squash bugs without using any pesticides?
Primarily, I will take and pull in a small garden. If you're talking about the raised beds, I'm out there every day and I usually hand pull those things off. But if you need to use a spray or something of that nature, I normally will take about 5 cloves of garlic. I will mash those up and then put them into a blender with about a quart of warm water and about a tablespoon of Dawn detergent. And I put the Dawn in there because and then I mix all that up in the blender. I strain it through cheesecloth, put it into a squirt bottle, and I'll spray with that. And that does a good job of keeping bugs and pests off. You have to make sure that you're spraying underneath the plant leaf as well as on top of it for it to work well. So, but that works well for me. You can also find soaps that are on the market that are non-hazardous, that are good to use. And so you can look for those. They're also in a spray bottle. All your big box stores carry it, as well as any of your hardware stores. And it's safe for you to eat and use.
Okay, thank you. I think the next question is still about protect your vegetables from like deers. And the question is, how can you protect something on a trellis since you can't cover the whole thing?
It's with deer, again, you want to create an environment away from your garden that's going to give them something to eat on rather than your garden. Something that's worked a little bit is if you'll take like Lifebuoy soap and put that into a mesh bag like you would buy onions in and hang that up around areas. They smell that. They don't like the smell of it. They go on. And you can also take the Milorganite. You can take handfuls of that and spread that 3 to 4 feet out away from your beds. They don't like the smell of that. And so that's been good to keep them away from your beds. You want to create an environment that they don't like the smell of, and that's one of the best things you can do. The garlic spray, if they're eating your hydrangeas and things of that nature, your hostas, your strawberries, spray them with the garlic mixture. They don't like it. You can also put, a teaspoon of hot pepper sauce in there. That helps with the squirrels and the rabbits. So try that and see how it works. Can't hear you.
Sorry, I mute myself. So the next question is, can you steal OWE onions on a full-sun area over 6 hours?
Onions, they'll make it in 4 to 6 hours. It's just going to take them a little bit longer to mature, but you can do onions in 4 to 6.
The next question, let me see. Okay, so the next question is, Will that garlic spray solution work for aphids too?
Work for aphids? Yes, it will. They don't like the smell of it, and the soap that's in there again makes them sick at their stomach, and so they don't like it, and they move on somewhere else. Again, make sure you're spraying the bottom of the leaf as well as the top when you do that. And every time it rains, you got to go out and spray because it's going to wash it all off.
Okay, so we have like a new question coming up. So about that onion question. So can onions grow in a space that have over 6 hours of full sun?
Yes, they can. We have onions and garlic growing around our fruit trees in our orchard that gets 8 to 10 hours of sun a day. So yes, they will grow.